Okay, so let's finish off. In this lesson, we're going to talk to you a little bit about Dynamesh and how Dynamesh works. And if we have a little bit of time, we might just go over one extra remesher just to give you a sneak peek of things to come. So let's just go ahead and get started. Now, Dynamesh is sort of like a remesher, which basically rearranges the topology of a mesh. Now, you may ask, why do we need to have that? Well, there might be some certain scenarios in where you stretch out. For example, let's go over here to one of our pieces. If I choose the move tool, and there might be some scenarios where the geometry is so stretched that when you start dividing it, you don't really get a lot of tessellation here versus the areas that have all divided in more scrunched in areas. So this is kind of where Dynamesh is very useful in sort of maintaining that. So let me go ahead and just kind of stretch out a piece of geometry for you and go through the location of where Dynamesh is. If you go and check under, pardon me, if you go through and check under geometry, and we go into where it says Dynamesh, you'll pretty much find Dynamesh there. Once you click it on, you'll see how all the geometry suddenly is remeshed, and now you have a whole bunch of resolution. So now when you divide up, you can kind of have a lot more sculpting resolution that will be a little bit more sharp. So with that said, some things to take into account about Dynamesh. Usually I like to do a deal where I just give it a couple of divides or a few divides and then turn on Dynamesh. And when it asks for free subdivisions, I normally hit no. That way I kind of have a nice standard setup for Dynamesh. And if you kind of look at it, if you need to make any readjustments, like you notice how I'm re-stretching everything, Dynamesh can simply accommodate you by holding down Control and dragging a mask and then releasing, and you can kind of, it will basically recompute these areas. So I can keep dragging. Let me go ahead and establish something more like the snake hook for you. Yeah. Like so. You can kind of see how we have the stretched geometry, and we can just kind of retopologize it. Now, this is pretty good for things like, for say, blocking out. You know, it's kind of a nice one. Now, let's go ahead and go back. One extra thing I'd like to bring into account is Dynamesh also, if we were to go through subtools, and if I hold down Control and left click over, you'll notice I duplicate a subtool. I duplicated the mesh, not the subtool. If you kind of look over here, it shows basically two different meshes. So we didn't hit the duplicate button. We didn't duplicate any subtool. We just duplicated a mesh here. So let me clear off the mask. Now, one thing that's interesting with Dynamesh is that if I were to have these pieces intersect, so if, for example, I had these pieces intersect like this, no matter what, the pieces are two separate meshes. They would be very difficult to separate, but something like move topology could segregate them off like so, you know. So if you want, one thing Dynamesh can do is if you use Dynamesh in intersecting geometry, you'll notice that it merges and recomputes it, and everything within is sort of taken out of account. So that's kind of a nice looking scenario for how we do it. You can kind of see all the geometry in transparency mode. There's not really anything in there. So that's always nice of a feature in Dynamesh, and it's something that we want you to kind of keep in mind when you are blocking out. Typically with Dynamesh, one of the most common things it's used for is, in fact, character blockout is the one that gets a lot of choices. A lot of people like to use Dynamesh for character blockout. So if you were to use a whole bunch of nerves and I'm sorry, not nerves, that's a Maya term. Primitives in here to help you with a character blockout using a combination of that and maybe the gizmo tool to stretch some objects and taper them into shapes you want for a character blockout, and then kind of combine them all up with Dynamesh. You can do that. Additionally, you can just keep constantly stretching things out and just re-Dynameshing by just hitting control and dragging off like so. So that is kind of where Dynamesh is. Now, before we end this, I want to kind of give you a quick show real quick of another type of remesher that ZBrush has. And this remesher I always kind of like to use because I'm a little old school, where I like to work with multiple subdivision levels. And that is under Geometry, and under Dynamesh we're going to go to Zremesher. Now Zremesher is another form of auto remeshing topology similar to Dynamesh, but it also does the job a little bit more clean. Like if you can kind of see all these pieces right here, it's not really like too terrible on this one, but there's like some pinches on here that we have to always deal with. Zremesher, on the other hand, gives us a more clean remesh. However, the problem is with Zremesher, it takes a little bit longer to compute that clean mesh. Another thing that we can talk to you about regarding Zremesher is that you can guide it. Example, you can create edge flow here and then create a more uniform piece, but we wanted to kind of give you a little bit of a different overview between this and Dynamesh. You can kind of see how everything's more uniform here and it has a little bit more cleaner topology, whereas Dynamesh is just sort of constantly got this little tapering off. Tries are everywhere. So we just kind of wanted to show you the difference between this. What I like to do is a lot of times if I'm using Dynamesh, I'll start off with my blockout with Dynamesh, and once I have what I want, I like to use Zremesher more and just work with multiple subdivision levels, which I can just hit with Control D and then go down and up with Shift D. So with that said, this kind of concludes our crash course for the first timers that are opening ZBrush, because now we're going to kind of take what we have and start to begin a very basic, very simple character for you. So with that said, stick around and stay tuned.